of Mr. Mti.
The one in Savannah Hills, that is correct.
And it might clarify matters a little. Savannah Hills is not a suburb. It's a townhouse complex, I understand.
Chair, it's a townhouse complex situated, if you're coming from Johannesburg side, if you're driving towards the Protea Hotel, it's on that road. It's on your left-hand side, Savannah Hills. If you need details of the actual house, I can provide that.
Now, that reminds me, the house that was built by Rian Hoeksma's company for Mr. Mti. Do you have a recollection of what its value was, more or less?
It was on the market for about 6 million rand, if I'm not mistaken, at one stage, but that was quite a while back, about 10 years ago. So the value of the property, if I compare it, for instance, to my property, I mean, it's much more elaborate. My property is only valued at about 10 million.
Yes.
That property would be valued at closer to about 18 million, 16 million, between there.
As of now, or as at the time when it was built?
No, as of now.
As of now?
Yes.
Okay, so it would be, your estimate is that it would be around 18 million in value?
18.
18. Yeah.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
If you go to, please, to paragraph 29.9, Mr. Agrizzi.
29.9, during 2007, Mr. Vernie Peterson was appointed as the National Commissioner, and on numerous occasions I tried to communicate with him, with him about possible ventures, but he'd have nothing to do with the Bosasa group of companies.
Yeah, just before you proceed on that, let me just complete the picture with regard to what we have referred to as Mr. Mti's house.
Yes.
Is your evidence that ultimately Mr. Mti lost out on that house? It never got registered in his name as had been planned initially?
That is correct.
Even to this day?
Even to this day.
He may have enjoyed the benefit of living in it, but he paid rent which he thought would be returned to him, but ultimately was never returned. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So he lost out.
He lost out. He walked out with only the furniture.
Yes. And that was mainly because the SIU had started working, investigating why he lost out.
That is correct.
And there was fear that if it was transferred to him, it would just spell trouble.
He was given an option of either staying in the house and staying in jail, or moving out of the house so it could be covered up.
Yeah, thank you.
Who paid the rent for that house?
At one stage, we increased his payment from 65,000 Rand a month in cash to 100,000 Rand in cash. That was when he left the department, because the department originally was paying for his rent of the property which Bosasa had built.
So Bosasa paid the rent by way of increasing his monthly payment, or it just increased his monthly payment and he would then pay the rent himself?
We increased the monthly payment so that he could pay the rent.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Agrizzi, you say during mid-2007, Vernie Peterson was appointed as National Commissioner. National Commissioner of which department?
Of the Department of Correctional Services.
You say you attempted to communicate with him about possible future ventures, but he would have nothing to do with any of the companies in the Bosasa group.
That is correct.
Right. At around that time was a further meeting held with officials of the Department of Correctional Services.
Correct.
Would you please tell the chair of that meeting?
Chair, a meeting was coordinated. I was called into the meeting. It wasn't the first meeting, it was the second meeting. And at the same meeting, it was arranged between myself, Gavin Watson. There was a gentleman by the name of Kulakani Sitole, who used to be the previous Commissioner of Correctional Services. Another person that was...
He had been... okay, maybe let me ask this.
Yes, Chair.
In terms of time or year, where are we now in regard to that meeting?
2007, Chair.
2007.
Correct.
Okay, so if you say Mr. Kulagani Stole used to be Commissioner of the Department of Correctional Services, that would have been before Mr. MT or even before that?
I'm not too sure when he was,
Yeah, but
it was before.
Okay, all right, thank you.
When he was,
Yeah, but
it was before.
Okay, all right, thank you. You may proceed.
There was another gentleman by the name of Zbu. I can't recall his surname. At the time, I was told he was I think the General Secretary of Pop Group.
It's a trade union.
Yes. I cannot verify that. I was told that, Chair. At that stage, I wasn't really interested in the process.
What was the subject matter of that meeting?
Well, the subject matter was to discuss how they could swing Vernie Peterson and get to a solution where he would start communicating with Bosasa.
Did you finish telling us the people who attended the meeting?
The one person was Spoo, it was Kulakani Sitole. Those were the people that attended with Watson and myself.
Okay, thank you.
I cannot recall if there were any other Bosasa directors at the meeting.
You say that the subject matter of the meeting was an attempt to find a solution to Mr. Peterson's refusal to communicate with Bosasa.
Correct.
What happened?
Well, it was agreed that they, which included Mr. Ngele, who was the regional commissioner of the Department of Correctional Services, would be paid R1 million per month.
Regional Commissioner of Department of Correctional Services in Gauteng?
No, in KZN.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm.
When you say it was agreed that they, including Mr. Ngele, would be paid R1 million per month, what is the detail? Was that for all, some? Who are the they?
That was for the team. How they were going to distribute it, I haven't got a clue. I wasn't involved in that. It was an invoice that they would provide us.
Who would provide you?
Well, it would normally come from, Sitole would get somebody to email it to us, and I would then receive it and pass it on to accounts, get Gavin Watson to approve it and put it through for payment.
Who would produce the invoices?
I cannot recall. I don't have my laptop anymore. That is in possession of African Global. But the invoices would be sent to me, and I would then process the invoices. And it was on a company letter invoice, which was called Flash Central.
So, is what you are saying this, that the purpose of the meeting was to discuss what was to be done about Mr. Peterson's refusal to have anything to do with Bosasa. Is that right?
The group of companies, you are correct.
Yeah. And you say it was agreed at that meeting that is it 2 or 3 correctional services people, Kulegan Sitole, Mngele, it was those 2?
It was those 2 that were there from previous correctional services.
Yeah, that they would be paid an amount of R1 million, which they would distribute among themselves, or it would be paid in certain amounts that, and you don't know what amounts, but the amount for them was 1 million rand. Was that 1 million rand per month?
1 million rand a month.
Yes.
And at that stage, Chair, and I think I'll go into it later on, there was even a dispute in terms of the VAT payment.
Yes. I think Mr. Pretorius is still going to come to it. Let me allow him to do that.
Perhaps I will. Thanks, Chair. You say that invoices were produced, fictitious invoices, on behalf of the team for R1 million per month, and these would be paid by the SASSA.
That is correct.
Okay, maybe I'll ask this because I want to know it now.
Sure.
But in terms of the agreement reached at that meeting, what were the two people going to do in order to, what were they going to do for BOSASA? Because the National Commissioner was Mr. Peterson, and he wanted to have nothing to do with BOSASA. What were they going to do? He was the top man, isn't it?
That is correct. Chair, and once more, it is my thinking, from what I heard in the meeting, was that they would put undue pressure on the department and on Bernie Peterson through the associations with Pop Crew and with the unions and the people.
Also, what was sought was that they would do whatever was necessary to put pressure on Mr. Peterson, I guess, to make sure that the attitude towards BOSASA changed.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, and you refer in the last sentence of 29.10 to that very quid pro quo. What
Correct.
was the intention of the payment?
Correct.
What was the intention?
Well, the intention was to utilize that to get influence against Bernie Peterson and to get him to either agree to work with us or to fool the wrath of Pop Crew.
And what was the purpose of obtaining Mr. Peterson's cooperation?
At that stage, he was the decision maker. He was accounting officer for correctional services.
But it may be obvious in the light of your earlier evidence, but let's be express here. What was the purpose of obtaining his cooperation?
Well, because obviously we wanted more business and new opportunities. I mean, all the opportunities are now dried up. All the effort and the money that had been spent before had all disappeared.
Were these payments made?
Yes, they were.
On a monthly basis, you say?
That's correct.
And for how long did they continue?
I cannot recall exactly how long or what period they were at, but what I do recall is that at one stage there was an issue with regards to the VAT, which I said was their baby and their responsibility, and at one stage we lost the staffing of the control rooms at correctional services, and so we reduced the amount from 1 million to 700,000.
I understand your evidence to be that the recipients of the payments were unhappy that the 1 million rand included VAT.
Yes.
Right.
The money that the two got, Mr. Kulegana Sitole and Mr. Mngele, do you know what Mr. Mngele's full name is or was?
Chair, I cannot pronounce it, but it is, I can provide you with it later. It is in the record somewhere.
Oh, okay. So this 1 million was for the two of them, as far as you understood, or were they to share it with other people?
We were told that they were the leaders of the pack, and they would share it with the other hungry, what do you call them, people?
Does that mean that it was hoped that part of it would, that they would try and use it to try and get Mr. Peterson to change his attitude, or it was clear that Mr. Peterson wasn't that type of person?
Mr. Peterson was not that type of person. I don't know how they would have tried to do it.
Yes. So,
And I didn't ask.
yes. But what you are saying is they would use it for themselves, but they would or could use it to help to get other decision makers within correctional services, or to get other people who could put pressure to put pressure.
Correct.
Okay. Yes, Mr. Pretorius.
Was that amount of 1 million rand amended at any stage?
It was, Chair, it was dropped down to 700,000 rand per month, and purely because there was one contract that Sondolo lost, so it was taken out to 700,000 rand. And then eventually, I think we realized, and I went to Mr. Watson and I said, look, we're wasting our time with these guys, just stop it, we're wasting money.
And the contract that you lost, specify that, please?
That was the staffing of the control rooms, if I'm not mistaken.
At correctional services facilities.
Correct.
You've spoken about that contract earlier, have you?
That is correct.
So you say that you ultimately said to Mr. Watson, you were wasting money on these people. Is it the two that you have talked about in the previous paragraph that you are talking about?
Correct.
Is your evidence that they were not delivering?
At the end of the day, it was just they weren't delivering anything to us.
Yes.
We were just paying money out to them every month on an invoice.
Yes. And did Mr. Watson agree that you?
No.
He didn't agree.
No.
So you continued paying them?
It continued for a month, and then it was cancelled, and he agreed to cancel it, and he offered them an optional alternative.
Right. Well, what happened during 2008 in this regard?
Well, it ceased, and
What
with
ceased?
the payment of the 700,000 rand. And what happened was it continued, but because Ngele was the commissioner of KZN, and he made life very difficult if you didn't pay on time.
Right. Just let's stop there because it may be confusing. It couldn't cease and continue. Just be a bit more particular.
Just repeat your question, please.
So what happened to the arrangement in 2008?
It ceased.
Completely?
It ceased with Sithole and Zbu.
And in relation to Mr. Ngele?
Well, they continued, but on a different basis. Perhaps
Would you
that's
tell the chair about that, please?
Yes. So let's say that agreement stopped. But we realized that, and there was enough pressure, and at that stage I'd never even met Ngele. I'm just giving you it as it was. He put a lot of pressure. He would phone up Gavin Watson all hours of the day. I remember one day, strangely enough, that he sent a message to Gavin Watson and to all the other directors to say, Abakati. I don't know what that means, but I got it as well. Angelo, he mentioned my name, Abakati, something like that. I don't know.
Okay.
To today, I don't know what the word means.
Okay. Well, do you know how it was spelled?
Abakati. I probably got the message here.
Oh, okay.
I will find it.
Okay.
Sorry, these things are coming back to me now, Chair.
Yes, okay.
But what happened was it was agreed that an amount of 57,500 would be given to Nele on a monthly basis for his influence.
To Ngele?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
For in the KZN region of the Department of Correctional Services.
Was Mr. Ngele happy with that amount?
No, he was extremely unhappy about it.
And what did he want?
Well, it was about the same time, and I accompanied Mr. Johannes Gumedi to a meeting with Nele. So whenever they didn't want to pay somebody, they would always take me with. And I would have to explain about the auditors that are all over us, and we cannot do it anymore, and that type of thing. So I went to the meeting, and the meeting was at the Intercontinental Hotel at OR Tambo, in the Quills, I think it's called, restaurant. Down at the bottom, on the furthest left-hand side. And the meeting started very cordial. As a matter of fact, Mr. Nele was in his full regalia, full uniform, and I commented.
Correctional Services uniform.
Correct, yes. And I commented on how smart he looked, and he was getting on a plane back to KZN. So he had limited time to meet with us. Or he was on his way to Johannesburg. I can't remember if he was leaving or coming, but he was at the restaurant with us in uniform. This was my very first meeting with him. I'd never met him before. Now, prior to that meeting, Mr. Gumedi and myself were in the vault when Gavin Watson was briefing us on what to say to him, and also packing the money for him in one of the security envelopes. So I specifically looked at the amount, and I asked what the amount was, and I checked that it was packed in properly. And it was 57,500. And the bag was sealed.
57,500 rand.
That is correct. The bag was sealed, and the bag was placed, Mr. Gumedi took the bag. And then during lunch, we actually sat with him, and he was very cordial.
At the hotel now?
At the hotel. So I'm just telling you about the packing of it because it's got relevance. And he said that he was unhappy with the amount that was paid to him. And I explained to him that SARS at that stage was not in a position to increase the agreed upon amount, and the security bag was handed over across the table actually it was handed to him by Mr. Gumedi. And then during lunch, everything was fine. But after lunch, during lunch, everything was fine. When it got to the end of lunch, he said he was unhappy and he would convey this dissatisfaction to Gavin Watson. All right? He said that the money that was in the bag was not the money that was promised to him. So I thought, and I confronted Joe Gumedi, that maybe he had taken out some money. It wasn't the case. He didn't take out anything. Joe wouldn't lie to me about something like that. And we found out that it was actually the amount, and he was just unhappy with it. So he phoned Joe, and he left messages for Joe Gumedi.
Before you go on, who was present at that lunch?
Myself, Johannes Gumedi, were present at that lunch.
And Mr. Nkele?
Yes.
And those were the people who were at the meeting as well?
Correct.
So it was 3 people?
Correct.
Thank you.
Well, do I understand that the meeting and the lunch were the same occasion? Or am I incorrect?
No, you're 100% right. That's the meeting at the Quills lunch, and then there's a second one that was held because...
Are you still to come to that?
Yes.
Yes, all right. Well, let's get there.
Okay.
You deal with it in paragraph 2915.
That's right. So Nele was still not happy and satisfied, and he conveyed this dissatisfaction to Gavin Watson. Numerous messages. As a matter of fact, it got so bad that eventually he would be passed from one handler to the next. So first Ishmael would handle him, then Joe would try and handle him, then Joe would give up, and then Trevor had to handle him. So Trevor Matenjwa was now given the responsibility of handling Mr. Nele.
So this is now in the months after that meeting?
It's 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later,
Okay,
Chair.
all right.
Okay. So, Chair, what happened was I was then told to once more accompany Trevor Matenjwa, who was at that stage the director of Sondolo, managing director, to the Beverly Hills Hotel in Umhlanga. So,
In Durban?
Sorry?
In Durban?
Oh, okay, Durban. Right next to the oyster box.
Okay.
Okay. And so we went through to the I went through to the Beverly Hills Hotel because I had my own vehicle down there. And we had a meeting with Mr. Nele. And it was a long meeting. It was about 2 hours. And at the meeting, I explained to him that BOSASA was not in a position to increase the amounts. They were not in a position to give him any more. And he wasn't happy with it all. He wasn't happy. He said he would deal with it in his own way. And he left with the explanation. He wasn't happy. He said, I'm leaving. I'm not happy with the explanation. Got up and stormed out. And he left without taking the grey security bag. He left that with Mr. Matenjwa. So
so you went to this meeting at Beverly Hills with a security bag containing money for him?
57,500 rand.
Yes. Yeah.
This is the second one.
Yes.
So what happened was comical because we sat in the Beverly Hills lounge. We offered to give him the bag. He said, "No, I'm taking it." And he stormed out. And about 10 minutes later, he then phoned Mr. Matenjwa up and he said, "Where's my bag? Can I come back and fetch my bag?" So it was a bit comical at this stage. And he then told Trevor to make arrangements for the collection thereof.
Trevor being Mr. Matenjwa?
Correct.
Okay.
So he got his bag at the end of the day. I was with Trevor when he phoned him to ask where Trevor was, so that Trevor could still give him back the bag. All right.
So on that occasion, you were present when the bag was handed over to him?
That's correct.
Okay, all right. Mr. Pretorius, I don't know, sometimes when you read the transcript later, because the transcriber or the one typing the record doesn't know how a certain name is spelled. They can write things that don't relate to you, to what exactly happened. Maybe we should spell some of the names that may be difficult for purposes of the transcriber. What do you think?
No, I've done so, but perhaps I should do more.
Yeah, I'm thinking particularly of Ngele because it is Ngele, but the witness pronounces it not as Ngele, and somebody who is typing the same name might write Nene or something else, so it might help. Ngele is N-X-E-L-E. Okay, let's move on. Thank you.
That is correct.
There are other ways to do it. We could provide the transcriber with the statement.
I'm
today,
quite happy
otherwise.
as long as it is done. Even if we don't do it here, just to make sure that when they type, they have the right spelling, so that can be done. If there's another way of doing it without us spelling the names here, I'm quite happy.
I think of France, for example, how that would be spelt by the transcriber, and we've got lots of experience of that. You refer in paragraph 29.16 to two purchases, and you say this occurred at some stage. Can you recall when? More or less.
I think the timing of this was probably in the region of about 2006, 2007, I think. Chair, I stand to correction. Are they in terms of 29.16?
Yeah, well, perhaps there's another way of dealing with it. At that time, what position did Mr. Gillingham hold?
Mr. Gillingham was the Chief Financial Officer.
Department of Correctional Services.
That is correct.
Yes. What happened?
Gavin Watson instructed Franz Foster that he needed to buy a new E-Class Mercedes for Gillingham from Constantia Cliff Motors. And Andries van Tonder had to purchase a new Polo VW from the Glen for Megan Gillingham, his daughter.
The Polo was purchased, according to your evidence, from who?
From Volkswagen the Glen, which is in Alberton.
And how were these payments to be made?
Look, the payments had to be made from electronic transfers from personal accounts because you can't very well go with a bag of cash and say, I want to buy a Mercedes E320 or I want to buy a new Polo. People are not going to accept it. And it's going to raise a lot of concerns. And you can't just deposit it into their account. So the only way to do it is to actually to do an EFT and to pay for it like that. Or to do it like every other normal person and take it over on an HP contract. So it was done via EFT from personal accounts.
Whose personal accounts?
I've got to remember now. Sorry, Chair, this is quite some time ago.
If
Are
you
you
can't
referring
remember,
to
that's fine, we can
29
move on.
point, excuse me?
29.17. If you can't remember from whose personal accounts these payments
Well-
were made,
Well, I know that it
move
was through Frans Foster's personal account and Andries van Tonder's personal account.
and would there be any refund to the person who'd financed the
Yes,
purchase?
yes.
How would that be effected?
Well, how it would be done is a bonus would be put through for the person, and the payment will then be made, the tax paid on it, and the check or the EFT would be deposited into the person's account that had to make the payment.
Right. And which company effected the refund?
Well, the refund would have been done via Concilium Business Consultants.
Did an issue arise in relation to this arrangement? You deal with that in paragraph 2918.
Well, there was an issue because the Mercedes-Benz had to be paid immediately. They needed the payment. And when you order a car from Mercedes-Benz, you basically have to take delivery of the car. You can't turn around and say, well, I'd prefer Mr. X to take over the car. The car was ordered by France, and the only way to get it into Gillingham's name would be to do it through a company or to do it, to actually order it in his name. So what happened was I received a bonus of 150,000 Rand, which I then paid over to Carlos Bonifacio, who was the Bosasa employee, as a loan. And then I would be reimbursed via Concilium Consultants. I received the bonus, I paid my money to Carlos, and Carlos in turn paid Constantia Kloof Motors.
What happened to Mr. Gillingham during September 2008?
He was suspended together with Zach Medise.
Did Mr. Gillingham contest his suspension?
Yes, he did.
Was he assisted in any respect by Bosasa?
Yes, we paid his attorney's fees.
And what happened during 2008 in relation to the SIU investigation and Mr. Gillingham?
Well, the SIU raided his house, Mr. Gillingham's house. Gavin Watson phoned me and said that the SIU had raided the house, come across a Bosasa laptop in the possession of Gillingham with the specification documents on it. He instructed me to go and meet with Gillingham, and I left the office and was on my way to Gillingham and to meet him at his house.
Did you meet Gillingham?
Yes. When I arrived at his house, he mentioned that the SIU had also found a business card printed for him by Dr. Jürgen Smit, which showed that he was a consultant for Concilium Business Consultants. I must just add, I knew nothing about that. He then informed me he was instructed by Gavin Watson to accompany Dr. Jürgen Smith to a meeting with the manufacturer of items for the Department of Correctional Services, and that they had to believe that he was a director of Concilium Business Consultants. So,
At the time, do you know whether, well, you know that Mr. Gillingham was still employed, albeit on suspension, by the Department of Correctional Services. Did you know whether he was also a consultant for Concilium?
he was not actually a consultant for Concilium because I checked afterwards and he never appeared on Concilium's payroll.
Do you know whether he was a director of Concilium Business Consultants at that time?
He was not a director. At the meeting, he was to lead them to believe that he was a director of Concilium Business Consultants.
There will be evidence later about the SIU search on the premises of Mr. Gillingham. But in the meanwhile, did you receive any instructions from Gavin Watson relating to the ramifications that the raid might have had for those concerned?
Most definitely, I was told that the legal ramifications needed to be dealt with, and we needed to get strong legal representative.
In particular, what did Gavin Watson tell you to do?
He told me.
What did he say should happen?
He told me that I needed to arrange fictitious loan agreements that needed to be drafted and concluded between Gillingham and the various Besosa employees for the monies that they'd received. That they'd received?
That who'd received?
That Gillingham had received and the benefits.
Did you do that?
Yes, I did do that.
Where are those agreements?
Those agreements are currently with the attorneys and with the various Gillingham himself, the people.
Do you have any in your possession?
I mark here an extra L, which is the only thing that I had in my possession relating to that, and that refers to a declaration that he made to the commission at that stage, Richmond MT, which was backdated so that it coincided with when MT was the commissioner, that basically said that he had declared some of the loans.
All right, let's take that step by step. Perhaps I preempted your evidence. In paragraph 2923(2), you say that you were also instructed to do something by Gavin Watson in relation to the outcome of the raid or the search and seizure operation.
Correct.
What was that?
I had to prepare a declaration in terms, on behalf of Gillingham, declaring that the money and the benefits he received were in fact loans to MT, and I had to backdate the declaration. MT was then to approve the declaration and hold on and given back to Gillingham, and I then took the declaration. I got Gillingham to sign it, took the declaration to MT, where I met him at the Protea Midrand, who, after he didn't want to sign it, but after I'd spoken to Watson over the phone, handed him the phone, he then agreed to sign it. And it's reflected in Annexure L.
Right, before we go to Annexure L, let's just get two things clear. You took the declaration to MT at the Protea Midrand.
That is correct.
You asked MT to sign.
That is correct.
MT initially refused.
Correct.
You phoned Mr. Gavin Watson and spoke to him.
Correct.
You then handed the phone to Mr. MT.
Correct.
Whilst Gavin Watson was still on the phone.
That's right.
And a discussion probably took place? Is that
correct?
Mr. Pretorius, do you want him to give more of that evidence himself?
I'm just summarizing, and then he can add
Yeah,
anything.
okay, all right.
After that discussion,
That's
what
correct.
did Mr. MT do?
Well, after that discussion, what can I say, Mr. MT, what did he do?
Yes.
No, he just left it. I mean, he just gave me the document back.
Sorry.
He backdated, he signed it.
You signed it?
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry, I thought that was in my statement. I thought
Yes,
you'd
now,
seen it.
just taking it through
Oh,
step by
okay.
step, it might have been unclear.
No, after he had spoken to Gavin Watson on the phone, he gave the phone back to me. He had received an instruction from Gavin Watson, and he just did as he was told. He just signed and gave it back to me, and it was backdated.
Would you go to page 349 of the bundle, which is the cover page, and there is a document at page 350.
That's correct.
What is this document?
That document is, every year I was told that it was explained to me that they do a declaration of any gifts or anything that needs to be declared. This is a document that we got typed up.
Who got typed up?
Patrick Gillingham got it typed. Well, I assisted typing it. He got me the letterhead.
And this document was typed.
Correct.
It's a document signed by P.O.C. Gillingham.
That is correct.
And it reads, our personal discussion on this matter refers. It's addressed to the Commissioner.
Correct.
At that time, Mr. M.T.
Correct.
And it reads, our personal discussion on this matter refers. Since the document which is designed for the disclosure of the financial status for SMS members does not make provision for the information on personal loans, I wish to bring the following to your attention as discussed. I have entered into personal arrangements with private individuals for assistance for my house and other personal assets. I wish to place on record that these individuals are not members of this department, nor are they employed by government, for your information and record purposes. And there's a signature. Do you recognize that signature?
Yes.
And it's against the date 12 April 2006.
Correct.
Is this the document that you were referring to?
That is the document.
Is it signed by anyone other than Mr. Gillingham?
Chair, it's also signed by Richmond M.T.
All right, there's a handwritten note on that document.
I'm sorry. When you say it's also signed by Mr. MT, are you saying the same document or a similar document is signed by Mr. MT?
No, it was the same document,
We're getting
Chair.
there, Chair. It's the handwritten portion in the bottom right-hand corner.
No, is the signature that appears at the right-hand corner at the bottom of the document at page 350, is that Mr. MT's signature?
Just above my signature, yes, Chair.
Well, page 350 is initialed by two persons, presumably, as you've said yourself, and one other.
Correct.
That would have happened when this document was commissioned.
That is correct.
By this document, I mean the affidavit and the annexures.
Correct.
But the particular memorandum that we're referring to has some handwriting in the bottom right-hand corner. Do you see that?
I
reads,
do.
And if I can read it, it reads, noted, underlined, please ensure that this, and I can't really read what it says thereafter, can you?
Yes.
That does not interfere. Is it interfere?
Please ensure that this does not interfere with your job or
rather has no conflict of interest
with the department.
To the department.
Or to the department.
Okay. You were at the meeting that you've just referred to. Were you present when this was signed by Mr. MT?
I was present.
And were you present when the note was made?
I was present.
Who made the note?
Mr. MT.
So at the meeting you've referred to, the document was produced. There was a discussion with Mr. Watson, and pursuant to, or after that discussion, a note was placed on the document and signed in your presence by Mr. MT.
That is correct.
You speak of Mr. Peterson, Vernie Peterson again in paragraph 2924, and the period late 2008. What happened then?
Well, during late 2008, we still couldn't speak to Vernie Peterson, so he was surreptitiously moved to the Department of Sports and Recreation. And the lady who was the Sports and Recreation as the Director General was moved and appointed as the National Commissioner of the Department of Correctional Services.
Who was that person?
The person was Koliswa Sibeko.
And that's Xoliswa.
I think it's pronounced Koliswa.
Yes, Xoliswa.
And Sibeko, Sibeko.
That's correct.
Now, after you say she was appointed as the National Commissioner for the Department of Correctional Services.
That is correct, Chair.
After that appointment, did you receive information regarding the fate of the control room contract held by Sondolo IT Limited?
That is correct, sir.
What were you told?
We were told that the Department of Correctional Services was going to cancel the contract, and Koliswa Sibeko was adamant that she did not want the Bosasa Group involved with correctional services. So I was tasked by Mr. Gavin Watson to accompany Papa Leshabane to the Intercontinental Hotel, again at OR Tambo Airport, to meet with Mr. Zach Medise.
Right, before you go on, which contract was this? You say the control room contract. Was
Correct.
that the staffing of the control rooms?
That was the staffing of the control rooms.
Right. And you've referred to that contract before?
Yes.
Right. And then, who was Mr. Medise at the time?
Mr. Zach Medise was at that stage in charge of correctional care and security at the Department of Correctional Services. So he was pretty high up in the department. He had a chief deputy commissioner status.
What happened at this meeting?
Well, the meeting commenced with myself and Mr. Medise, and I was busy explaining to him the benefits of the outsourcing, and it was then that Deshabane arrived, and he gave, while we were discussing the benefits of outsourcing, he gave Mr. Medise a packet, the grey security packet, wrapped in the newspaper.
Had anything happened earlier that day to give you an indication of what this parcel was all about?
Well, earlier that day, Gavin Watson and myself had actually packed the grey plastic bags with cash to be handed over to Medise. And the bag was given to Leshabane. So very similar to what happened with Joe Gumedi previously, where he took the bag with him. In this instance, it was Papa Leshabane that took the bag with him.
And what did you actually see physically at the meeting in relation to this bag?
Sorry, could you please clarify that question?
What did you see physically that happened at the meeting in relation to the bag?
Well, the bag was handed over in a newspaper, so you can see when the bag is not fully covered and wrapped. It's not wrapped like fish and chips or something. It still sticks open. So there was a newspaper, and it was handed over in a newspaper. That's what I saw.
Did you speak to Mr. Leshabane about that particular event after the meeting?
I spoke to him afterwards, and I just wanted to confirm that he'd given the full amount to Medise.
And what was Mr. Leshabane's response?
That he had.
And what was the full amount for Mr. Modise?
Chair, I cannot remember.
You can't
I think I
remember.
mentioned it in the statement. I think we get to it.
Okay.
We
all
actually
right.
do get to it.
So who were at the meeting, yourself,
It was
Mr.
myself, Papa Leshabane, and Mr. Zach Medise.
Yes. And did you say this was at the Intercontinental Hotel at OR Tambo?
Yes, but we did not have lunch.
But that's the same hotel where you had met Mr. Ngele at some stage?
That's correct.
Yes.
This meeting specifically was in the foyer where there's a lounge area, not in the restaurant.
Yes, okay. Oh, your meeting with Mr. Ngele in the same hotel at some stage was in a restaurant?
It was
At
in
the
the
hotel?
restaurant, at the hotel. We were having lunch.
Yes, okay.
Would you go to page 352, please?
So, I'm sorry. Did Mr. Modise accept the the money, the bag, the security bag, and did he go with it?
Most
Did he take it
definitely.
with him?
Most definitely. He was actually on his way either to Cape Town or to Durban, one of the two.
Okay, thank you.
You go on now in your affidavit to talk of a media release.
Correct.
Would you go to page 352 of bundle S1?
I am there.
Is this
I'm
the
sorry, Mr.
document that you're
Pretorius.
referring to?
I'm sorry, Mr. Pretorius, I'm sorry, I may have missed this. Mr. Modise was not one of those who were getting monthly payments, was he?
Yes,
At
he
the
was.
time, he was.
Yeah, that's correct.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you.
All right. It's
Yes,
a-
Mr. Pretorius.
It is what appears to be a press release or a transcript of a press release under the heading Prisons Graft. Here's the proof, Minister.
It's correct.
And the byline is that of the journalist Adrian Besson, Johannesburg, South Africa, 30 January 2009.
I recall the article very well. It is probably one of the most accurate articles.
What page is that, Mr. Pretorius?
January 30th,
The page, no, the page where I will find that.
352.
Oh, thank you. Yes.
You say this article is accurate to your knowledge?
Most definitely not like some of the smut being written today.
Well, let's just stick to this article, shall we?
My apologies, Chair.
Yes.
It reads, on Sunday, the Department of Correctional Services placed expensive advertisements in 3 national newspapers urging anyone with proof of impropriety in the awarding of prisons contracts to inform South Africa's law enforcement agencies.
Correct.
Do you recall those advertisements?
I do.
And the second paragraph reads, this week we present the proof.
Correct.
It continues to read, confidential documents and correspondence leaked to the Mail and Guardian suggest a highly improper relationship between the department and controversial facilities management group BASASA.
Correct.
It goes on to read, we can reveal that BASASA, which has received nearly 3 billion rand in contracts from Correctional Services Minister Ngandi Balfour's department, had confidential documents leaked to it by the department's former chief financial officer and Balfour confidant Patrick Gillingham, had access to tender documents for major prison projects before they were advertised, and spied on senior correctional services officials during a 2006 workshop. Let's just review that paragraph, please, Mr. Agrizzi. The estimate of 3 billion rand contracts received by BASASA from correctional services, is that estimate reasonably accurate?
I think, you know, if one adds up everything together, I haven't done the exercise right now, but it was an accurate article. It was actually a very good article.
And the amount?
I can't comment. I'd have to actually work it out.
Right. The first bullet refers to the receipt of confidential documents leaked to BASASA by the department's former chief financial officer and Balfour confidant Patrick Gillingham. Leave aside the relationship between Gillingham and Balfour for the moment, please. That fact, is it correct?
In terms of the Balfour, sorry, could you refer me to the paragraph in my statement?
All right. You're at page 352.
Yes, I'm just reading the article.
You see in the top third of the article, or the
Yes,
document, there are
Correct.
3 bullets.
yes.
Right? I'm dealing with the first bullet.
Yes,
I'm not asking you about the relationship between then Minister Balfour and Patrick Gillingham.
yes.
What I am asking you is whether it is correct to your knowledge that confidential documents and documents confidential to the Department of Correctional Services were leaked to BASASA by Mr. Gillingham.
That's right.
Is that correct?
That is correct.
Right. And you've given evidence of exchange of documents
Yes,
already, and you may give more.
yes.
The second bullet reads, BASASA had access to tender documents for major prison projects before they were advertised. Is that also correct?
That is correct. I would like us to go back to the second bullet, please.
First
Chair.
bullet. You'd like to
First
go back
bullet.
to the first bullet.
Mr. Balfour, all right, at that stage, Minister Mwande Balfour actually only received probably a glass of wine from BASASA when he visited us. He did not receive anything. I want that clarified,
Yes.
please.
Okay, thank
Okay,
you.
so that,
Thank
you know, there's no, I mean, he maybe had a glass of wine,
Yeah.
red wine.
The third bullet reads, spied on senior correctional services officials during a 2006 workshop. Do you know anything about that?
That is correct, it was done.
What happened? I don't recall
Well, there was
anything
an
in your evidence
instruction-
thus far.
That's
We should try and speak one at a time, if that's possible.
my apologies, Chair.
So tell the chair about that spying operation or event.
What happened there, Chair, was that basically I was asked to do a spying exercise on them by Patrick Gillingham, and at that stage he was so powerful, and Richmond he was so powerful, you just followed whatever they wanted, they got. Simple as that.
So what actually happened?
Well, there was a company employed to go and take photographs and to actually mingle with them. I can't remember which company it was, and to give a report back on them.
Them meaning correctional services officials.
Correct, yes.
And the event at which this occurred was a workshop which was held in 2006.
Correct.
And did you supervise that exercise?
I just got feedback from it. I actually, if you ask me if I supervised it, yes, I would take responsibility. Then I supervised it.
Right. And to whom did the report of this exercise go?
It went to Patrick Gillingham.
The next paragraph deals with Mr. Gavin Watson. We needn't deal with that. The next paragraph deals with Lindela, and perhaps we should just read that onto the record. The group also runs the controversial Lindela repatriation camp
Yes.
for the Department of Home Affairs
Yes.
and has large contracts with the South African Post Office, Airports Company of South Africa, and the Departments of Justice and Transport.
Correct.
You've testified to those matters. It goes on to say the Special Investigating Unit, SIU, has been probing BASASA since 2006 and raided its offices in December. 3 weeks after the raid, the company was re-awarded the massive prisons catering contract it landed in 2004. Is that correct?
I said that this is probably the most accurate news report, but I did not say that it didn't have errors in it. The one error is that there was 3 weeks after the raid. There wasn't actually a raid. It was arranged that they come and copy the server farm. So that is not
So the
correct.
Special Investigating Unit,
Yes.
SIU, did attend at BASASA premises and carried out certain searches there, in particular copying of servers.
Yes, it was, but it
We'll
wasn't a
get to the
raid.
detail of that in due course.
Okay.
But is it correct that 3 weeks after that event, and notwithstanding that event, BASASA was re-awarded the catering contract that was originally, or had originally been granted in 2004.
That's correct.
It goes on to read, the department's advertisements on Sunday were a reaction to the Mail and Guardian's report last week of alleged irregularities in the awarding of the latest catering tender.
That's correct.
It goes on to say, former Prisons Commissioner Vernie Peterson suspended Gillingham in September after receiving a preliminary SIU report.
That is correct.
Peterson was later transferred to the Sports Department in what was widely seen as a reprisal for his opposition to Balfour's attempts to extend the 2004 contract. That's what the report says, but you give no evidence in regard to Minister Balfour.
I think Balfour was innocent in this. I don't think he tried to extend it. I think what happened was he walked into a meeting, if I recall correctly, he was annoyed with Vernie Peterson because Vernie Peterson had accused him of receiving a vehicle from Bosasa. And what happened was, and I'm sorry, I didn't comment on this because I didn't think you would ask, but basically he was annoyed with Vernie Peterson and he said, I'll show you who's boss. That's apparently what happened. But I can tell you now that there was no evidence ever that Balfour had received a vehicle or anything like that. And I don't think it was Balfour that pushed him out.
But in any event, it is correct you say that Vernie Peterson suspended Gillingham in September.
That part is correct.
Of which year? 2006, is it?
No, it was later. It was about 2007, I think, 2008, around there.
Right.
I can't recall.
Let's just interpose here because it's relevant and will become relevant later. After Mr. Peterson had suspended Gillingham, you say Mr. Peterson, or the article says Mr. Peterson was later transferred out of the Department of Correctional Services. What happened to Mr. Gillingham after his suspension, or after this suspension?
Well, he sat at home and...
No, but do you know whether he was re-employed or was finally dismissed?
Sorry, just explain again to me. I don't understand. He wasn't dismissed. He was put on suspension,
yes,
and he went on suspension for about a year.
Yes.
I don't know if that clarifies that.
I think he wants to know what happened after that.
Then he resigned.
Okay.
He actually resigned from the department, and he was in... Okay, that's not what
Was there
you're
an earlier occasion on which Mr. Gillingham was suspended?
No. Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, we'll deal with that evidence in due
Okay.
course. Let's get back to the text of the press release on page 352, and I'm sorry I took you out of sequence.
Yes.
Do you know what role Mr. Gillingham played in relation to the award of what is referred to here as the latest catering tender?
Well, as far as I know, he was the head of the tender committee, bid adjudication and the bid evaluation committees.
Right. And we'll get to the detail of that when we deal with the SIU report.
Yes.
And then there's a heading, 2004, A New Romance. The press release under the heading, Here's the Proof Minister, continues. It reads, in 2004, the contract for running prisons' kitchens was outsourced for the first time. The tender was officially advertised on May 21 in the government's tender bulletin. You've given evidence about
Correct.
that contract. It goes on to read, but documents show that on May 1, Bosasa employee and co-founder Danny Mansell sent Bosasa's operations coordinator, Angelo Agrizzi, papers containing more than 90% of the bid conditions and specifications.
That is correct.
So that is a communication of information relevant to the bid to yourself approximately 3 weeks before the tender was first advertised.
That is correct.
The article continues, 3 weeks later, the Department of Correctional Services made available the same document with the same spelling errors to the rest of the catering sector. Do you recall that?
Yes, I do.
Is it correct?
It's 100% correct.
On August 6, BOSASA was awarded the entire contract worth 239 million rand a year for 3 years.
That is correct.
Goes on to read, the department extended BOSASA's contract for another year and expanded it to include more prisons, adding 82 million rand to the bill. Is that correct?
I think I do cover that in my affidavit as well. That's correct.
And that paragraph concludes, it was the further extension that led to Peterson's clash with Balfour. Do you know anything about that?
As I mentioned earlier, there was a discussion between Peterson and Balfour, and there was an altercation about the vehicle. The actual altercation was about a vehicle, which Peterson wrongly accused Balfour of.
All right. But do you know anything about the further extension of the contract being a matter of some dispute between Peterson and Balfour?
I'm not fully aware of that, no.
Right. It continues, that is the article, continues, and we're at page 353. In July 2004, the department also gave BOSASA a 1 million rand tender for nutritional training for prisons' kitchen staff. Is that a correct fact?
That is correct because, and you will recall yesterday I alluded to it in terms of the function that I was invited to by Dr. Smith. That is correct.
The paragraph continues, again, Mansell sent Agrizzi large parts of the tender document, including bid conditions and specifications, on May 12. The tender was advertised on June 4. Are those facts correct?
That is correct.
So just to summarize again once more, you were in possession of tender documents, including bid conditions and specifications, before the advertisement of the tender.
Correct. But I just want to clarify something. I think this refers to the HK2 2004, which was the catering tender.
All right. We will get to the detail of 4 particular tenders investigated
Yes.
reasonably comprehensively, it appears, at least
Correct.
from the documents by the SIU.
Correct.
And we'll deal with that
I'm happy with that.
hopefully
Chair.
sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
Then there is a heading on page 353 which reads 2005, you've got mail. Do you see that?
I do, Chair.
The paragraph under that head reads, the inclusion of CCTV cameras in the catering tender meant that by 2005, BOSASA had a national control center to monitor the kitchens. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Continues to read, this linked perfectly with its next contract, a 237 million rand tender for access control and CCTV in 66 prisons. It went to a newly registered company, Sondola IT, which revealed in 2006 was 40% owned by BOSASA Operations.
That is correct.
Was the interest in Sondola IT limited to 40%?
Which was owned by BOSASA.
Yes.
Yes, it was 40%. The others' shareholding was held by other companies. I can't recall all of them at the moment.
Other companies
Other
external to
entities.
BOSASA,
Other entities.
within the BOSASA group, or external to the BOSASA group?
I cannot recall, sorry, Chair. That was the early days, and I cannot recall.
In any event, the reference here to the CCTV contract, is this the same contract to which you have referred in your evidence earlier today?
Correct.
Just before we go on, do you know what documents Adrian Basson had in his possession to enable him to author this press release?
In terms of?
Well, where did he get his information from?
Are you talking specifically about the travel invoices? Or are you talking
No,
about?
I'm talking generally about
The contents of the article.
the
Oh,
contents.
the
of
contents.
article.
This was common knowledge. He had done his homework. He had actually gone and looked for the information.
Yeah, I think Mr. Pretorius is is asking whether you are able to assist to say this is where he must have, or he did get information from.
But he got it from inside the company.
You had nothing to do with information being given to him?
Most definitely not.
Yes. Okay. I think Mr. Pretoria was just trying to see whether there might have been somebody inside who was giving.
There were a couple of people inside, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Anyway, you've given your evidence, and this is the point of the question, Mr.
Yes.
Agrizzi. You've given your evidence from your own memory and your own records.
Oh, yes.
This information, if you had nothing to do with any communication with Mr. Basson, presumably came from some other source.
Spoken to him once or twice, and that is it.
But you
So
didn't give this information
No,
to
I
Basson.
wouldn't have spoken to him those years anyway.
Right. And it was given at a time when I understand that you were still loyal to Basasa.
Unfortunately, yes.
So, well, we can submit, but perhaps I can just place on record the submission will be that this is corroborating information from another source.
Okay.
Let's get back to Sondola IT. You've said you're not sure of who the shareholders were, but you confirm it was 40% owned by Basasa Operations in 2006.
Chair, just to give you a bit of background, shareholding changed like kids eat sweeties. Sometimes they like separating and having blue ones, and sometimes they're yellow Smarties, and sometimes orange Smarties. This was a mess. One never knew what the shareholding was. It was how Gavin got up in the morning. So I cannot recall.
Okay. I think it's a point you have made also before to say the shareholding used to change very regularly.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
The article continues to say other shareholders, and the references to Sondola IT, included former President Thabo Mbeki's political advisor, Titus Mafolo,
Correct.
and former Strategic Fuel Fund chairperson, Seth Palatsi, P-H-A-L-A-T-S-E. Do you know that as a fact?
Yes, it's a fact.
Yes. And then the article continues in the next paragraph to read, on December 17, 2004, Basasa's IT coordinator, Johan Helmand, H-E-L-M-A-N-D, emailed Agrizzi certain tender specifications that were to appear in the official bid document published on February 4, 2005. Is that information correct?
That is correct, Chair.
So once again, before the publication of an official bid document by the Department of Correctional Services, you had in your possession, with the assistance of Mr. Johan Helmand, tender specifications.
That is correct.
Article continues, on April 29, Sondola IT was awarded the contract. Is that correct?
That is correct.
In 2005, Agrizzi and Gillingham started emailing each other prison research reports and newspaper clippings. Is that correct?
He would send me often these research papers and all that type of nonsense.
What was the purpose of that?
Sorry?
What was the purpose of that?
Perhaps he was trying to keep me informed on what was happening in the industry. I really wasn't that interested in it.
On August 29, Gillingham sent Agrizzi a copy of questions from City Press put to the department about the Basasa contracts the leaked documents show.
That is correct.
It continues in the next paragraph. On December 9, 2005, Basasa landed a 487 million rand prisons contract for security fencing through a small Cape Town firm, Pazulu Fencing, it had purchased.
That is correct.
Is that a reference to the evidence you've given earlier this morning?
Exactly that.
Article continues to read, there is double proof that the company had privileged information long before the tender was advertised. You've told the chair of that.
I think I explained it in detail.
3 months earlier, on September 25, Agrizzi emailed Mansell a voluminous document containing bid specifications. Quote, please verify and check. We can sit tomorrow AM, unquote, Agrizzi wrote. Did that occur?
I cannot recall that specific date, but if it's in the document, it occurred.
Right. Well, do you have any independent recollection of communications with Mansell containing or in relation to a document containing bid specifications?
I would have responded to him if he had sent me an email, and I would have responded in that manner.
But that's all you can say about that?
I can't recall it.
Right. It continues, the article that is, to read, on October 3, Agrizzi sent a longer version headed Fence Doc Final to the chief executives of Beckart, B-E-K-A-E-R-T, Bastion, and SA Fence and Gate, Michael Rodenburg, R-O-D-E-N-B-U-R-G, and Jeff Greyling, respectively, under the subject line, quote, Fence Doc Final, ... very confidential, ... unquote. What do you recall of the report in that respect?
I recall that I would have been sent that document because I did not have time to do it, as I mentioned in my statement. I would have been sent that document by Danny Mansell or perhaps one of the team that were working on the actual document itself.
And what would you have done, or what do you recall doing with that document?
I would have literally speed read it, and I would just forward it back to the team.
And the executives mentioned here of Beckart, Bastion, and SA Fence and Gate, Michael Rodenburg and Jeff Greyling, do you know them?
Yes.
Is that the same person that you referred to earlier in your statement as Rodenburg?
That's exactly the same gentleman.
Right. And what would the purpose of, did you recall, or do you recall, sending that longer version, Fence Doc Final, to the gentleman referred to here?
Yes, you must remember that Mansell had emailed it to me, and I was the responsible party. He would want to say, he said in his email on the 25th of September, we said there that we would sit and we'd go through it. I then would have passed that document on to the relevant parties to look at it.
And were the persons mentioned in the paragraph we've just referred to the relevant parties?
Yes.
It goes on to read, that article that is, this contained the full bid conditions and specifications published by the department on October 14. That's 11 days later. Is that correct, that statement?
I can't recall that specific date.
But do you know whether you had in your possession at some stage and you transmitted to relevant parties a document containing the full bid conditions and specifications which were later published by the department?
If you have a look at, the sequential flow, yes, that happened.
Right. And you've testified to these facts, albeit in different words, this morning.
Yes.
Then that paragraph continues to read, Beckert Bastion supplied cladding material and SA Fence and Gate was contract to do part of the installation. Are those facts correct?
Well, they are incomplete, I'd say, because if you look at it, we testified this morning that the cladding material was actually the fencing, the actual mesh, and SA Fence and Gate was not the only person that was subcontracted to do the fence. It was a lot of others. Yes.
I'm sorry I interrupted you.
Yes.
You mentioned those other companies involved this morning.
Correct.
It goes on to read, this week Greyling, quote, categorically, unquote, denied seeing a copy of the bid document before it was published. He said, quote, it should be recorded that the tender was based on the standard public works correctional services specification with which we are all well acquainted from previous bids. The prior possession of the tender document by anyone would therefore be of no specific advantage to such person. Now, I'm not sure that you were privy to what Mr. Greyling might have said,
I cannot comment.
but
Chair.
there Mr. Greyling says, doesn't matter if you've got prior possession of tender documents because it would be useless. These matters are consistent, or this information is consistent with standard public works correctional services specifications, and it's of no use to anybody. What do you say to that?
Not entirely true. The standard installation process might be exactly the same as reflected in the tender specifications of public works or any other department, but the actual mesh was mentioned was different. We had made the opening and closing mechanisms different, so it wasn't just a normal gate opener, it was an electromagnetic slider. So that was different, and there were some other changes made as well. So that paragraph is not entirely true.
So is it correct to say specifically the prior possession of the tender document by anyone would therefore be of no specific advantage to such person?
No, it would be definitely of an advantage.
Interestingly, in that paragraph, although the report said Mr. Greyling denied seeing a copy of the bid document before it was published, his explanation seems to indicate that not that he hadn't seen it, but that if he had seen it, it would be of no use to anybody. But I just make that remark in passing. It's not necessary to comment. Let's continue then on page 354. The report continues to read, Colette Stoffberg of Baycart Bastion, now called Beta Fence, replied that years before this contract, Beta Fence provided technical specifications to the Department of Public Works that were used in this tender. Do you know anything about that allegation?
No, I'm not aware of the truthfulness of that.
The third paragraph reads, according to an industry insider, the big advantage lies in knowing the quantities required for the tender weeks before your competitors.
That is a fact.
Continues in the next paragraph to read, on October 10, 2005, Agrizzi sent Gillingham a 6-page document titled Equipment Specifications and Guidelines. The same section featured in a tender for a comprehensive television system comprising 6,000 TVs for communal cells published 4 days later. Is that correct?
That is correct.
On November 28, Agrizzi emailed Mansell the confidential evaluation sheet the department used to adjudicate the TV tender, which Sondola IT won on March 17, 2006. Is that fact correct?
That fact is correct.
Then the article continues on page 354 under a new heading reading 2006 Spies in the House. The first paragraph under that head reads, on February 9, Agrizzi sent Gillingham a document headed, quote, Tender Evaluation Criteria New Waterfall, unquote, containing comments on bid specifications for a contract for catering services at 7 prisons in the Waterfall Management Area, KwaZulu-Natal. Do you recall that fact?
I recall it.
Did it occur as stated?
Yes, it did.
Continues, the tender was officially advertised on May 19. 7 days earlier, Gillingham sent Agrizzi the confidential evaluation sheet for the Waterfall tender with a message, quote, Hi, attached, please find the reworked evaluation sheet for your comments. You will notice the evaluation sheet for sites visits cannot be published and will not form part of this document. Regards, Patrick, unquote. Do you recall that having occurred?
I do.
Not only does it seem that you were provided with a confidential evaluation sheet, you were even asked for your comments.
Yes, you did.
Did you provide comments?
I don't think I did, if I recall correctly. I can't recall that specifically.
The report continues. On September 15, Bosasa Operations was awarded the Waterfall catering tender worth 123 million rand over 5 years.
That is correct.
On April 24, 2006, Agrizzi sent Gillingham a letter in which an anonymous writer asks the chairperson of Parliament's Correctional Services, Dennis Bloom, to, quote, sort out, unquote, the attack on the department by, quote, international capitalists, unquote, and activists of Afrikaner companies, unquote. This week, Bloom confirmed receiving such a letter. Do you recall that having occurred?
I recall it vividly. It was always conspiracy theories created by certain individuals.
Right. So attacks on Bosasa, it appears, were characterized by what is referred to as an anonymous writer as attacks by international capitalists and activist Afrikaner companies. Do I understand that references here correctly?
Chair, if I can just add for completeness. Every time that there's an attack on Bosasa or anybody there, it gets blamed on racism, it gets blamed on international espionage. It's all these conspiracy theories. So that statement there is 110% correct.
The article continues in the next paragraph to read, on June 21, Agrizzi sent Gillingham a surveillance report of a Prisons Department security workshop at a Drakensberg hotel in June 2006. The 25-page report makes it clear that the agent was asked to spy on the department's Chief Deputy Commissioner of Security, Willem Damons, D-A-M-O-N-S, and his subordinate, Tony, T-O-N-I-E, Venter. The report also contains pictures of people and cars at the hotel, as well as the inside of the conference room. You spoke earlier this afternoon, Mr. Agrizzi, of the spying operation that you were involved in. Is this the same operation?
That is exactly the same operation.
And is it correct that someone was asked to spy on the department's Chief Deputy Commissioner of Security and his subordinate?
That is correct.
The
Those
article
those on whom Bosasa decided should be spied on, was it those that were seen as having a negative attitude towards Bosasa, or what?
Yes, anybody who was negative or problematic
Yeah.
would be spied on.
Okay.
Right. Who instigated the spying operation?
The actual instigator behind the scenes was Gavin Watson.
And the purpose of the spy operation?
Was to try and confirm a conspiracy theory that was, I used to, may I add for completeness, I used to have to draw up organograms that were fictitious in nature to try and show the conspiracy of the Afrikaner Broederbond from Stellenbosch, and then it wasn't the Stellenbosch crowd, it was another crowd from wherever. It was always conspiracy, so I can't confirm, that they were true because I never saw them. Does that answer your question?
Yes. In short, these were conspiracies that were created or sought to be established in order to undermine the good work that Bosasa was doing.
Of course, it was always a conspiracy to undermine, and it was from the devil.
I don't know if the two of you may have spoken at cross purposes just now,
Sure.
but the conspiracy theories that you are talking about
Yes, sir.
were intended to defend / protect the image of Bosasa. I thought it was within Bosasa that somebody came up with the theories
That's correct, Chair.
as a response to negative publicity about Bosasa.
That is
That's
correct,
right.
Chair.
Okay.
I'm not sure, but let's try and
maybe
clarify,
there was no.
Chair, because it may be relevant to other evidence that will be led before you, Chair. Bosasa continued with what you have said are its unlawful activities.
That is correct.
There were attacks on Bosasa from, amongst others, media sources.
Correct.
And Bosasa was attacked for doing what it had done.
That's correct, Chair.
In response to those attacks, Bosasa said, there is no merit to these attacks. They are merely attacks by international capitalists and activist Afrikaner companies for their own conspiratorial purposes.
That is correct, Chair.
Thank you. Yeah.
The article continues. In his message to Gillingham, Agrizzi wrote, I didn't see the reason, need to email you the rest, nothing actually happened. Gillingham replied the next day, quote, hi, thanks for the report, and it seems as if they behaved well during their session, regards, unquote. Do you recall that exchange between yourself and Gillingham?
Vividly.
Is there anything to add to that that might interest the Chair?
I actually said to him that I was uncomfortable doing it because nothing actually happened. There was no conspiracy theory there at all. These guys were doing their job and they were at a function.
Right. It continues, that is, the article continues. Bosasa's lawyer, Brian Bibek, advised his client not to answer the Mail and Guardian's questions. He warned the Mail and Guardian to publish, quote, at your peril, unquote, and said Bosasa would pursue charges of criminal defamation if defamatory material were printed. We know the material was printed because we see it here, or reference to it here in these pages. Was any criminal defamation action ever instituted resulting from this article?
Chair, we did take action against Adrian Besson at one stage, but we weren't successful at all.
Was the action you are talking about the laying of a criminal complaint with the police?
No, we had taken it to the press ombudsman. I think the press ombudsman was Mr. Joe Chloe.
Yes.
And the funny thing was he had made a mistake, he must be getting on in years, and he sent a message to Fareel Haffajee and said, how should I respond to this email? So and by accident he had actually sent it to my email address as well. So that was, and then we took them to court and nothing really happened.
Okay.
The final paragraph of the article reads, the department's Manelisi Walela, M-A-N-E-L-I-S-I, Walela, W-O-L-E-L-A, responded that the Mail and Guardian's questions, quote, are part of a broader brief given to the SIU, unquote, and urged the newspaper to provide the unit with proof of impropriety. Gillingham did not respond to the Mail and Guardian's queries. And then the article continues to refer to pictures which are not referred to.
That's correct.
Chair, I don't know if you're taking a break this afternoon.
It might be a good idea to take a short break.
Very good idea.
And maybe of 10 minutes.
Thank you, Chair.
Are you suggesting we take it now?
Yes, Chair.
Okay, we'll take a 10 minutes break and we'll resume at 10 to 4.
Thank you, Chair.
We adjourn.
Right, so that's the state capture inquiry that's currently underway in Parktown in Johannesburg. And Angelo Agrizzi, former COO of Bosasa, is on the stand and has been on the stand for some days now. He continues with his testimony, and as at the beginning of the week, he continues to have some fairly serious allegations to make about the levels of corruption that he experienced and admits also to being part of. All right, you're watching SA Today on the SABC News Channel, independent and impartial. And we'll be continuing shortly right after this. In fact, let's carry on a little bit actually with this story. The former, as you saw, the former Bosasa COO, Angelo Agrizzi, has been telling the Commission of Inquiry into State Capture that former Correctional Services Commissioner Linda Mti received a monthly bribe of 65,000 rand a month from the company. Agrizzi told the Commission Mti received monthly payments from Bosasa CEO Gavin Watson for consultancy work. This despite receiving monthly bribes. Mti was also given a newly constructed home, fully furnished at Savannah Hills Estate in Midrand, north of Johannesburg. Agrizzi said that the payments even continued after Mti left the department. He's also told the Commission of how a tender contract for catering services at the correctional facilities was extended by former acting National Correctional Services Commissioner Nontsikelelo Jolingana.
Okay, Chair, during 2007, it was, I can't remember exact dates and that, I'd met Mr. Mti for the second time, so it was in the morning sometime. I went with Mr. Watson to Richmond Mti's house in Savannah Hills Estate, and I was informed, we sat outside waiting because he had gone on a morning walk or something, and we sat outside waiting, and Gavin said, "You see this beautiful house you built?" He actually was being facetious. He says, "You built for this politician," meaning that, you know, he's saying that we worked and we earned the money, and then he would say that you actually built it because it was an expensive house. So I was also informed that all the furnishings in the house had been done. And later on, the scheme, when the SIU report broke and everything started coming out, I was then only really informed of the scheme that happened. Until that time, I did not know how they had done it. I suspected that there was bribery in terms of Richmond Mti and the house and all that, but I did not have a clue who had organized it, how it had been done, as it was very secretive.
Well, you provide detail on page 59, and perhaps you should place that on record.
Well, there's a company called Rikele Construction that's operating.
R-I-E-K-E-L-E.
That is the correct spelling there, Rikele. R-I-E-K-E-L-E. Which is operated by a gentleman of the name of Rian Hoeksma. He didn't only build that house, but he also was involved with the building of the house for Gillingham. And Gillingham's house was at Midstream Estates. It was, I think, Hutton Gate. I cannot remember. Obviously, I'm not going to give out the actual addresses because that would put them at risk and that type of thing. So at this stage, Rikele Construction had been given a lot of work by Bosasa. He was busy revamping certain parts of Landela. Then we bought up 2 hostels, the old hostels. One was called 2 North, and so they were doing a lot of work, and there was a lot of building taking place. So all the payment of these costs of these houses, the construction of them, was done via Bosasa, through Rikele or whatever. But the payment of these costs of the houses done by Bosasa was done via a company which Danny Mansell had set up.
Away from that commission, the Electoral Commission has started with the registration of prisoners for the 2019 national elections in all 8 correctional facilities in the Limpopo province. There are 8 prisons in the province from different regions with a population of around 8,000 prisoners. IEC is urging prisoners to exercise their democratic right to vote. Although many don't have their identity documents in their possession, the IEC said that it will engage with the Department of Home Affairs to assist those that don't have identity documents. The last registration date for inmates, they are eager to be part of
Yes, Mr. Pretorius.
Thank you, Chair. Let's move then to paragraph 30.2 of your statement. You refer to the use of Blake's travel. Tell the Chair about that, please, just very briefly.
Briefly, Chair, flights, travel, accommodation, and on occasion, quite frequently, they would also be booked by me on the Besosa VIP account at Blake's Travel for Mti, his wife and his family, and I've provided the supporting documentation, all the flights, in a box to the Commission.
Thank you.
Thank you. Paragraph 30.3, you relate an incident concerning the records at Blake's Travel. How did this matter arise?
Chair, it arose when they started publishing information with regards to Blake's Travel. What actually happened at that stage was that we had to go and fetch all the computers from Blake's Travel, as well as the invoicing books, because they had copies, and we had to make sure that they were all destroyed. He obliged and handed everything to us.
Who gave the instruction?
Instruction came from Mr. Watson.
And to whom was the instruction given?
To both myself and Andries van Tonda.
And the instruction, once again?
Was to go to Blake's Travel, collect the computers, collect the documents, take them to Leipzig Vlei, destroy them.
More or less, when was this?
This was just after the media report that you read just earlier.
2009?
Yes.
Blake's Travel was going to cooperate with this,
Yes,
and they did.
he did, because most of his business came from Besosa. We spent about 1.7 to 2.2 million rand a month with him, and we were going to replace everything. He took it further, if I may clarify for completeness, and he then issued us with blank invoice books. Because remember, Chair, when the invoice is being captured on the computer, it refers to an invoice number. So the invoice number was a paper document which had to be replicated and put in the file for the auditors to see. But also the names were changed on the document itself.
But what you destroyed in terms of this instruction, what you ultimately destroyed was not just the paperwork, it's the computers as well.
That's correct.
Or about how many computers did you destroy?
There were about 3 that were being used specifically.
Yes.
So we replaced them.
And you say Bosasa was a big client of Blake's Travel.
We'd spend between 1.7 and 2.2 million rand per month
Yes.
with them.
So they knew exactly what you were going to do with the computers and why you...
No, we told him.
Yeah. So they knew why you wanted to destroy the computers, and they cooperated.
That's correct, Chair.
Thank you.
Pursuant to this instruction from Gavin Watson, did you then meet with Brian Blake of Blake's Travel?
That is correct.
What did you tell him?
I told him that we were instructed to collect all the documents and to have them destroyed. He obliged and he gave it to us.
What did he give to you?
The documents and the computers.
Right. And after collecting the computers and documents, what did you and, I presume, Andries van Tonda do?
That's right. We drove to a hostel which we were busy developing at that stage, and there was a big hole there, and we threw them in there and asked someone to go and fetch us some petrol, a gentleman by the name of Reino Rueda, who was responsible for various gardening and maintenance and oversight over like a groundsman type person, and tasked him to go get us some petrol. He brought the petrol, and we poured over the items, lit it, and burnt everything, burnt all the evidence. We'd been instructed to do it.
Reino is spelled R-Y-N-O, is that correct?
That is correct.
Right. And the name of the hostel to which you've referred?
Leipzig Vlei.
Leipzig Vlei,
Yes,
right?
it's directly opposite, parallel to the Bosasa offices in the same street.
Was that a property which belonged to Bosasa?
That is correct.
And what was the condition of the site?
Well, it was a construction site at the moment, at that stage.
And you say in your statement exactly that, it was being revamped and was a construction site.
Correct.
And did you dig a hole?
Yes, we used the back actor. There was actually a hole there. Gerrit van der Bank was the guy who drove the TLB.
What's
and
a TLB?
Front-end loader, I don't know what. All I know is it's yellow metal. I've never really...
Anyway, there was a hole. What
Yeah.
did you do then? You threw the
everything
documents
in
and
there,
computer in the hole. You
poured
set it
petrol
alight.
over it.
Let's one at a time, please. There was a hole. You threw the computer and documents in the hole. You set it alight, as you said.
That is correct.
Was anything further done to conceal the operation?
It was covered up. Literally.
That is the cover-up.
It was covered up, Chair.
Sorry. And thereafter, in relation to the travel orders that subsequently occurred, what was the arrangement?
We've gone into that already in terms of the JJ Fenter account, and basically what happened was that account would be, any VIP travel would be booked under that account. That account then would be reconciled and given to Dr. Jurgen Smith at the end of the month, who was running Concilium Business Consultants, Chair, and he would then reimburse me through Concilium for the actual travel. So he would take all the travel documentation, let us say maybe perhaps I booked my family or my children somewhere to go somewhere, he'd go through each and every invoice, have a look at it. If there was personal stuff, he would book it to me personally and deduct it from the amount, the total amount, and give me the balance that was used for the individuals.
Right, that was in relation to travel after the cover-up of the documents.
Correct.
What was done in relation to the records that were destroyed?
Could you just explain
Well, now
yourself?
we have a travel company with no records.
I think I explained it earlier that there was a certain computer that was used for Bosasa, or certain computers that were used for the Bosasa account. So it wasn't that they had no records. They had records, but they had just a total figure as an opening, which would be an opening balance when they start the next month.
Yes, sir. Then I don't understand the allegation in paragraph 30.5. Would you explain that, please, to the chair?
Yes, no, that wasn't to do with that is to do with the Bosasa records, not with regards to Blake's records.
Not with regard to?
Blake's records to do with Bosasa's records of travel. Let me clarify.
Yes, please. Will you
Chair.
tell what happened there?
So what happened is there was a certain employee that was instructed, because Great Plains would refer you to an amount. The auditors might very well come and say, can we pull that invoice, please? So what would happen is this lady was instructed by Gavin to rewrite every single travel invoice
In Bosasa.
in Bosasa, because unfortunately, Blake's Travel would use a carbonized invoice book. So they would write accommodation for tea at the Paxton Hotel on this date. This was his extras. That is their commission, 10%, and that's the total. Then that would be transferred onto a statement. So you had to now rewrite that invoice. You couldn't really scratch it out because there were 3 copies. So Martel Wills, sorry, I just want to correct that because I slipped out the name. This person would, sorry, I did not want to mention a name for fear of safety.
Yes, no, that's fine.
Okay. They do have the name of the person. The person would write out the invoice, but instead of now putting T, they would write the Agrizzi. And they would put it in my name. Or they
Yeah.
would put it in someone else's name.
Yeah.
Then that invoice would be attached and be given back to Blake's Travel, their copy. The other copy would be retained in the accounts folder. Does that explain the question, Chair?
That was in relation to the period preceding the destruction of evidence.
No, it wasn't preceding the destruction of evidence. It was post the destruction.
No. I understand that the writing up afresh of information was post the destruction.
Correct.
But I want you to confirm whether the information that was being written up now related to what had happened prior to the destruction.
Correct, Chair.
Okay, all right.
So just in summary then, after revelations in the media concerning the activities of BOSASA in relation to favours concerning travel and accommodation, Blake's records were destroyed and BOSASA's records were recreated.
That is correct, Chair.
Now, you do say that what had prompted or this, or at least in part, was that a journalist, it appeared, had copies of documents from Blake's travel, which showed that BOSASA used Blake travel to facilitate travel arrangements of, amongst others, government officials. Now, you destroyed the records, Blake's records relating to travel arrangements made at the request of BOSASA.
Correct.
For a certain period. Now, what was the plan as to how the information that this journalist seemed to have was going to be dealt with? Was it that it was going to be suggested that it was not authentic
Correct.
information?
That is correct, Chair.
Okay. On the basis that anybody who went to Blake's travel records would find something different.
Correct, Chair.
Thank you.
It would be a conspiracy theory from Stellenbosch.
But of course, the destruction of the evidence was a true conspiracy.
Correct.
Okay.
It was.
Yeah.
It was, you're right.
I must point out, Chair, and to you, Mr. Agrizzi, that in paragraph 30.1 you refer to Annexure M as the media release containing information from Blake's. The portion, and it appears to be a portion of Annexure M, which we've just dealt with in your evidence, doesn't appear to refer to Blake travel. I stand to be corrected. But it does appear that that media report attached is not complete, but we will check it.
Okay, all right.
If I can just add there,
Yes.
Recall, Chair, there was actually pictures of photostated invoices, handwritten ones, that appeared with that. So there should be more there. I think that was the only annexure I had at this stage, but I'm sure if we ask the paper concerned, they'll provide it to us.
Yes, in fact, if we go back to Annexure M, if we go back to page 351,
No, it doesn't show it.
where we see the article, and turn to page 354,
Yeah.
at the bottom of the page, it reads, pictures from a confidential surveillance report of a senior department of, and then the document says no more, but it appears that there is further content to this annexure.
Correct.
Well, we'll check that and
Yes.
revert if necessary.
Correct. Thank you, Chair.
In paragraph 30.6, then, you say what the position was after the destruction of the Blake's travel documents and the arrangement that was made in relation to travel for very important clients of Bosasa. Correct?
Correct.
They were fictitiously recorded in the books of Blake's travel, is that correct?
That is correct, Chair.
Then in paragraph 30.7, you say that Mr. Blake was subpoenaed to testify in a matter instituted by the SIU in the Pretoria High Court. Very briefly, what was that matter?
The SIU wanted information, records, documentation, and hard drives in terms of any dealings with the Bosasa group of companies. That is what it was about.
And what happened in relation to that subpoena?
Well, the subpoena was...
To your knowledge?
To my knowledge, I know because I was integrally involved, Chair. The subpoena was postponed and postponed. There were numerous arguments and excuses given, and basically ended up with a meeting that took place at Brian Blake's attorney's office one morning with Brian Biebuck present, myself present, in Randfontein, where we tried to intimate to their attorney that he must start to postpone and play for time with the SIU. His attorney wasn't happy because he said, you know, you people are actually trying to, and he told Brian Biebuck, he actually said to him, he says, you're playing with fire because you're trying to interfere with witnesses. So,
Were you, to your knowledge, successful in your endeavor to prevent the subpoena being carried out?
no, I don't think, I don't know at all, no.
Do you know whether Blake ever testified in court?
I'm not aware.
Then in paragraph 31, you go on to deal with information received by Gavin Watson arising out of the SIU investigation. Would you tell the Chair what happened in respect of the SIU investigation and the records of Bosasa?
Chair,
Before you deal with that question, Mr. Agrizzi, I'm looking for the paragraph here, and I don't see it immediately. Oh, yeah, I think it's paragraph 30.7 that Mr. Pretorius referred to a few minutes ago. Say, Blake was subpoenaed to testify in a matter instituted by the SIU in the Pretoria High Court. Gavin Watson instructed Biebuck to attend to a meeting with Blake and his attorney to ensure that Blake would not implicate Bosasa in his evidence. You might not be able to answer this, but if you can, please do. Do you know, the idea that an attorney must go and have a meeting with somebody to ensure that that person doesn't implicate somebody else? It seems strange. It's different if he's going there to listen and note what his evidence is. What was your understanding of what Mr. Biebuck's role was really going to be there? Was it just to listen to what was being said, or was it much more than that?
no, the role that was played, and you must remember, Chair, as I mentioned right in the beginning of my testimony, if an instruction was given to you and you did not follow it out, there was a dustbin with your name on it.
Yes, but this was, wasn't this an independent attorney?
Doesn't matter. Then the instruction would be, don't use him anymore. And who was his biggest client? Was us. So he would do whatever he had to do.
So are you saying to me that from what you knew in terms of his role and the interactions between himself, that is now the attorney, and yourselves and Mr. Gavin Watson with him, he knew that his role was to prevent Mr. Blake telling the truth?
Was to stymie the investigation. That was his role. He went out there to stymie the investigation. And there's a second occurrence with different people as well, Chair. So it's not just one isolated occurrence. But the fact is, and this is what I tried to get across right in the beginning, that even, I can't say a judge, I don't want to take that chance, but even the dear Pope would probably be corrupted if they had to deal with the situation.
Well, what you are saying is quite serious.
Very.
Particularly in respect of an attorney.
Correct.
So I just want you to make sure that you are quite clear that what you are saying is really true.
Chair,
Yes.
I wouldn't lie.
Yes.
I didn't spend fortunes
Yes.
to get to this point,
Yes. Yes.
and my time and my effort to lie to you. I will
Yes.
come and tell you the
Yes.
truth.
Yes.
And the fact of the matter is, he had to stymie the appearance
Yes.
of both Mr. Brian Blake and
Yes.
also of the taverners as well,
Yes.
which he did very successfully. He stymied it for, I think, close to 2 years.
Okay, thank you.
Well, let's just understand your evidence in that respect. You understand, as we said in opening before you gave evidence, Mr. Agrizzi,
Yes.
that we are not presenting a case to the chair, we're presenting ongoing investigations.
Correct.
They will be tested in due course
Yes.
by further investigations, and they will obviously be tested in due course by cross-examination of you.
Correct.
And the submission to the chair of different versions. Only thereafter will the chair make up his mind, and only thereafter will we make any submissions in regard to the truth or otherwise and the reliability of your evidence.
I'm well aware of that, Chair.
So we're in an investigation process at the moment. Let me just say in relation to this, if the attorney concerned was briefed by BOSASA to protect BOSASA's interest, there may have been a legitimate interest in finding out whether Blake's Travel, a client of BOSASA, had any information that might implicate or prejudice BOSASA.
I wouldn't know what the legal ramifications are. I will just put it to the chair as it happened. And this is what happened, and that's what I'm putting to the chair. In terms of the legal ramifications of that, it really doesn't worry me in the sense that I'd rather just tell you the truth. Hopefully that we can prove through this all that the justice system in South Africa actually works.
Well, it may be that your understanding of the meeting is a gloss that you put on the contents of the meeting, which is your own perspective, and that the facts of the meeting were really Mr. Bibak making legitimate inquiries of the attorney of Blake's Travel.
The attorney was quite annoyed, Chair.
Which
Attorney?
Mr. Blake's attorney. So I would leave it up to the investigators, as was suggested by Advocate Pretorius, that the investigators do the investigation and they make their own conclusion rather.
Thank you.
Let's go on then. In paragraph 31.1, you say that Gavin Watson received information in respect of the progress of the SIU's investigation.
That's
We
correct.
will refer in more detail later in your evidence to the receipt of information by BASASA and its representatives concerning the SIU investigation. But I want to ask you, please, about the contents of paragraph 31.1, where you say that an instruction was given to an IT specialist. Let's start. Who gave the instruction referred to here?
Every single instruction came from Gavin Watson.
And the IT specialist referred to, was that an employee of the BASASA group or an external specialist?
It was an internal person in the company that was an IT, worked in IT.
And were you present when the instruction was given?
Yes, I was.
What was the instruction?
Instruction was to fake a crash, server crash, and destroy files.
Which files?
Any files that could implicate the company before the investigators could gather evidence.
Right. At this stage, had the SIU investigators searched the premises of BASASA?
No.
Before the instruction was carried out, was any process undertaken?
There was a disaster log created on the server, and I'd circulated a memo in this regard, but unfortunately I could not find the memo, so I have what is known as the disaster log reflected in Annexure N.
I'm referring to the information which you say was ultimately destroyed.
Yes.
Apart from the destruction, was the information preserved in another form?
Yes.
How?
It was preserved before the destruction of evidence. I requested that it be preserved on 2 hard drives, 3 hard drives, that I've made available to the Commission and made available to the Hawks.
All right. The document at page 356, what is that document?
Sorry, I just need to get to it. Annexure N refers to a data log, which is called the disaster data log for the 8th of November 2007.
Right, this is the cover page of a document.
That's correct.
The document at page 357, is that part of this disaster log?
That is correct.
Where do we find the scope of disaster and its classification referred to in the contents list on page 356?
Well, sorry, are you asking me where do we find the extent of the data that was damaged or lost?
No, sorry, let me be clear.
Yes.
On page 356, there's a document headed BASASA IT Disaster Log 8 November 2007.
Correct.
Under the head Contents,
That's right.
there is a list, presumably of those contents. 1, background. 2, scope of disaster. 3, disaster classification. 4, recovery strategy.
Correct.
Can you help us, please, because I'm not an expert, and I presume the chair is also not an expert. Where do we find in this document, or the document on the following page, the scope of the disaster classification, and the recovery strategy?
Chair, I cannot answer this. I'm definitely probably less versed in computers than you are.
In any event, on page 357, there is a paragraph which reads, "Dear Johan, it is with regret that I have to inform you that we cannot perform a data recovery on your RAID 5 set due to 2 hard drives having failed simultaneously. According to our data recovery specialists, it is impossible to rebuild the RAID set if 2 drives fail." And then there's some more technical language which follows, but perhaps an expert can explain that to the Commission or whoever might be interested in the future.
Correct. Sorry, I cannot help the Chair.
Yes,
Then-
no, that's fine.
In paragraph 31.2, you refer to a telephone call that you received from Gavin Watson, as you say, on a Sunday afternoon.
I was at a hotel. I was actually entertaining guests, Americans that had been working with us on the PPP project, and I received a call. It was on a Sunday, it was a Sunday afternoon, and I was told that the offices were going to be raided the next Monday. I was only supposed to come back on the Tuesday because these were Americans and they were on a game safari drive and that type of thing. I had to leave them. I was instructed to come back. I had to leave them there, arrange transfer for them back, and drive back to the office.
What did Mr. Watson tell you?
He had told me that he had got information from Mr. Siopela that the Hawks were going to be or someone was going to be raiding the office. I cannot remember if it was the Hawks or the Scorpions, or I don't know who it was, but we were told to meet him at the office, so I met him at the office.
Right. Did Mr. Watson tell you whether Mr. Siopela told him in turn when this raid, as you describe it, would take place?
It was apparently Monday, the Monday.
Yes, the day following the telephone
Correct.
call from Watson to yourself.
Correct.
And did Mr. Siopela tell Mr. Watson anything else that Mr. Watson related to you?
He said they were looking for specific documents and specific transactions, and I was just told to be at the office.
Did you go to the office?
Yes, I did.
And when you arrived there, did you find Mr. Watson there?
As a matter, I found him in his office.
Who else was there?
Andries van Tonder was with him.
And did you receive any instructions?
Yes, the instructions were, they gave, at that stage, I can't even remember, but at that stage, Andries was ahead of me. We were instructed to go through all the offices to have a look at anything possibly incriminating evidence. The information that Gavin received from Cecilia Siopela was that they were looking for the sale of shares agreement in respect of Pezulu fencing, as well as agreement between Gavin Watson and MT for the payment of money in return for an undertaking from him that would ensure that Bosasa would be given preference in the awarding of tenders with correctional services.
Did such a document exist?
Yes, it did.
How do you know that?
Because I saw the document and I actually made a photostat of the document.
And do you have that photostat?
Unfortunately, I do not have that photostat.
So if I understand you correctly, you saw a document
Yes,
being an agreement between Gavin Watson and Mr. MT for the payment of money in return for an undertaking to favour Bosasa in relation to the awarding of tenders.
it was a 3-page document and it was very specific.
And did it say what you've said in paragraph 31.3?
It's exactly.
And were you instructed to look for any particular documents?
Yes, we were instructed to look for them.
Those documents to which you've just referred.
That is correct.
Right. Did you find those documents?
We found those documents.
What did you do in respect of those documents?
Well, in terms of Are you referring me back now to 31.3? Because you're asking me,
No, I'm
found
dealing
them?
with 31.4. What did you found the documents,
yeah,
and
we
then what
removed
did
the
you do with them?
documents. We removed the documents, Chair.
Yes, I'm
say-
sorry, Mr. Pretorius, before you proceed, just to go back to 31.3.
Yes, Chair.
You say you found a document that appeared to be an agreement between Mr. Gavin Watson and Mr. MT about that Mr. MT would ensure that BOSASA was favored in terms of contracts from correctional services, and he would be paid by Mr. Gavin Watson. That's what
correct.
you say.
That's correct, Chair.
And you said you made a photocopy of that agreement. Did I understand you correctly?
That's correct, Chair.
But you proceeded and said you don't have it.
I don't.
Did it get lost in the meantime, or?
Chair, they were all packed together and they were stored.
But you saw it, you had it for some time.
Yes, Chair.
So you had a chance to read it properly.
Correct, Chair.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Do you
And
remember?
it was signed by both?
It was not signed. It was only signed by Gavin Watson.
Yeah,
I can't recall if it was signed by MT. I know that it was signed by Tony Perry as a witness.
okay, all right.
Well,
I can't recall seeing MT. I'd be lying if I told you I had seen it. I can't recall it.
Okay.
it seems improbable, if not very strange, that such an arrangement would be recorded in writing and signed.
It was
Do you
done.
have any comment?
It was done. It was recorded in writing.
And what is also a matter of some concern in relation to your evidence, Mr. Agrizzi, is
Yes.
that yesterday and in previous days you've testified not once, but I think more than once, that it was Gavin Watson's affirmed practice never to reduce things to writing and never to sign anything. If this was an exception, it's a very unusual exception.
I think that Mr. Richmond MT perhaps knew Gavin better than all of us. And he insisted that there be a signature.
But Mr. MT too would know that this was a wrong agreement. What they were agreeing to do was wrong, and he probably wouldn't like there to be a written record of what he was party to.
Chair, you will see later on that the agreement was actually found much later on, and it was actually it was then shown not only to myself but to somebody else as well, and then handed back to Mr. Watson.
But you say you are not sure about Mr. MT's signature on the document, but you are sure about Mr. Gavin Watson's signature.
Chair, I can guarantee you that the signatures that were on the document were very noticeable signatures. There were Gavin Watson, Tony Perry, and there was another signatures. I don't know if it was Richmond T's signature. I can't recall. I've seen his signature on one other document, and that was post the fact when we got him to sign the acknowledgement of debt. And that's why I can't comment. I cannot say that was his signature.
Okay.
His name was there, but
Okay.
whether it was his signature or not, I cannot say.
Thank you.
Perhaps that evidence, Mr. Agrizzi, will be tested in due course under cross-examination, but for the present, it seems that even on your own evidence, Gavin Watson would not sign documents because, as you say, he did not want to be held accountable for any evidence that appeared in writing.
I'm sure as my colleagues start presenting, you will see that he did maybe sign one or two documents that were important.
But
we
if
do
that
have
was his
signature.
practice,
I'm sorry, Mr. Pretorius, he hasn't finished. Mr. Agrizzi
So-
hasn't finished saying
so
what he
there
wanted
are-
to say.
There are the odd occasion when he would slip up and he would sign something. And if you recall, this started off in 2003, 2004. At that stage, it was very bullish in the company, and I can tell you what I saw, and I saw the signature. Other people will testify as well. And then, yes, I'm welcoming the cross-questioning.
Thank you.
Just to put the perhaps obvious follow-up question, if Mr. Watson signed only when he slipped up or only on the odd occasion, in other words, in the exceptional circumstance,
Yes.
it's rather remarkable that the recording of an unlawful transaction would be such an exceptional circumstance.
It was a major deal for the company. I think, Chair, I can only attest to what I saw.
Yes, obviously you can understand why Mr. Pretorius is asking you the questions that he's asking you, and I'm asking you the questions I'm asking you, simply because the question would be, what would be the value of that agreement to both Mr. MT and Mr. Watson? They couldn't go to court and use it if they didn't comply with their obligations.
Chair, I know that and you know that. It seems to me that they didn't know that. It's as good as having the side agreements in terms of fronting and giving somebody shares. It's the same thing. It's illegal. You can't do it.
Thank you.
All right. You say then that in relation to these documents that you were asked to look for and remove, that you in fact removed the documents.
Yes, we did.
What do you mean by remove the documents? Is that the putting in storage that you refer to now?
What happened was we put them into storage. We just packed them into the boot of my car because he wanted them out of there. And we took them and we stored them on a farm.
Right. And then did something later happen in relation to these documents?
Yes.
What was that?
There were newspaper reports coming out that were rehashing the whole SIU investigation. Gavin Watson approached not me, but Andries van Tonder and myself only at a later stage to say to us, we need to go destroy the documents. So Andries, what I'm trying to say is Andries came to me and said, we have to go destroy documents. I then phoned Gavin up and checked with him and said, oh, you're right. He said, I want you to go destroy documents.
Did you do that?
He asked us to look specifically for the document. He was concerned because he hadn't seen the document yet that he had signed between himself and MT.
That's the document you refer to in your evidence now.
31.6. That was the only document that we had to hold back for him. He wanted that document.
So you didn't destroy that document. What did you do with it?
No. As I said to you earlier, I had made a copy of it. So the copy that I made was not then my correction. I got a bit confused. It was 31.7. Then what happened there was we took the document to him, and he was very relieved, visibly relieved, because he thought that would be the end of his life. He then he shredded it by hand. He put it in a Ziploc bag, you know, the sandwich bags that you get, and he put lots of water with it and just kept making like a papier mâché and then flushed it down the toilet, and he was very relieved.
We're going to now get on to matters relevant to the SIU report, and you introduced the topic at paragraph 32 of your affidavit on page 6 of Exhibit S1.
Correct.
Before Mr. Pretorius asks you questions on that, did the raid happen?
Chair, no, nothing happened.
It did not happen.
No.
Okay, thank you.
The only thing was that we had reached an agreement with the SIU that they could come and copy the servers, but there was no raid.
Well, not that nothing happened, something did happen,
Yes.
but it couldn't be described in your mind as a raid.
Not at all. There was no blue lights and flashy cars like you see on TV and when the Scorpions used to go and arrest and raid. There was nothing like that.
We will refer in due course to detailed evidence in regard to what happened.
Okay.
On 6 January 2009, I'm not sure it's in dispute, the Department of Correctional Services apparently awarded Bosasa Operations Pty Limited a new catering contract.
That is correct.
And the number of that contract, which becomes relevant later, apparently HK 14/2008.
That is correct.
For what period was this contract?
This was a 3-year contract.
And the documentation used for the prior catering contract tender, was that same documentation again used for the second catering contract awarded to Bosasa?
Well, in terms of the specifications, correct.
Now, in paragraph 32.2, you refer to a meeting. Let's tell the chair about that meeting, please. Between whom was this meeting?
Well, in terms of that period of time, a meeting was arranged between the representatives of the SIU. So we had heard all these rumors that they were investigating Bosasa and all that. So the suggestion was made, have a meeting with them and find out. So we had a meeting with the SIU.
Who's we?
Myself, Andries van Tonder, Gavin Watson wasn't there. He wouldn't attend that. He was rather veer away from that. Frans Foster was there. Brian Biebuck was there. And if I remember correctly, Advocate Lawrence Hodes was there. And basically we had the meeting with SIU. There was Suede Jacobs, I think it was there. Clint Ullman was there. And there were various other people from the SIU. Those were the people that were there.
Ullerman.
Sorry?
Can you spell that?
Ullerman.
Ullerman.
It's like a school test. Oellerman.
Well, I'm sure that name appears in documents that we
Yes,
will
it
refer
does.
to in due course. But this meeting, did it take place subsequent to another communication between
Yes, and that was the
Bosasa on the one hand and the SIU on the other?
That is correct.
What was that
So
communication?
the meeting, the other meeting was, no, sorry, we cannot have the servers checked now because we're busy with month end and year end, so we tried to postpone it. So it was a letter of postponement.
You refer in paragraph 32.2, in the second sentence, to a communication
Yes.
that preceded the meeting. What was
Correct.
that communication?
That communication was to say that we have heard via the press that we are being investigated and would like to have information regarding that so that we can tender our assistance going forward.
And the meeting then took place? What was the outcome of that meeting?
Well, a date was arranged for the investigation and for the mirroring of laptops and that type of thing.
So, do I understand you correctly? It was agreed with the SIU precisely when they would come to image the hard drives and laptops at Bosasa.
That is correct, Chair.
The date that was arranged in that meeting with the SIU, did it remain or was it changed?
It was changed,
Why?
Chair. Well, it was changed because it was postponed on instruction because we needed to give enough time to the IT specialist to actually remove potentially damaging information.
Who instructed the postponement?
Well, the postponement was instructed by myself, and obviously I was instructed by Gavin Watson.
And did representatives of the SIU eventually make mirror images of hard drives and laptops?
Yes.
In paragraph 32.5, you talk about interaction between two BOSASA servers.
Correct.
Please explain to the chair what you're saying there.
So for redundancy purposes, you'd have two servers. The one being a BOSASA main server, the other one was linked to another server. That's how I understand. I'm not an IT specialist. But when something is done on the one, you can actually monitor it on the other one. So it's a mirror image. You have an arrangement with a chap by the name of William Brandon and Max Leeson. Those two youngsters had actually studied with one of the nephews, and they were very trusted. So Gavin personally arranged with them, as he had a relationship with them, to monitor what the representatives of the SIU, I think it was Mr. Jacques Malan, that was to check up on what he was looking at and what he was doing.
Yes, we'll hear of Mr. Malan later, but
yes,
to simplify things, whilst Mr. Malan or other representatives of the SIU were copying the data on the server, that activity was being monitored on a connected server by the two gentlemen referred to in your affidavit.
correct, yes.
Were the two gentlemen you refer to entrusted with any other task?
I can't, yes, they had to delete potentially harmful information that was on the server. I think we actually mention it here. To ensure that they removed information which might damage or implicate BOSASA prior to the mirror image being made.
All right, let's deal with paragraph 33.1 then. Did you ever see a copy of the SIU report?
Yes.
When did you see it?
Sorry?
When did you see it?
I was sent a copy by Bibak.
Right. When?
I was actually in Paris at the time with Andries van Tonder, Gavin, and we were on a holiday trip.
Can you recall more or less when you saw it?
It was in 2009. I cannot remember. Well, let's think. It was summer in Paris.
And in paragraph 33, you list some of the contents of the report
Yes.
containing information that you say you were indeed previously aware of. And then you list a number of items in paragraph 33. Just please read those out for the
Yes.
chair.
I will read them out. Furniture bought for Gillingham and Tea, architectural fees, certain holiday trips paid for, certain cash deposits, certain vehicles purchased, certain sponsorships for children's varsity fees and or tuition, provision of forex for travel allowance, certain repairs and maintenance on houses, construction of houses, purchasing of imported kitchens, a retirement village concession for Gillingham's father, numerous other favors such as rugby season tickets, computers, printers, and even a matric dance dress for me in Gillingham, and then trading in of certain vehicles where the person could not obtain a lucrative settlement. These were bought by individuals and subsidized by BOSASA.
Now, you have given evidence about some of these issues in this list that you saw
Yes,
in the report.
correct.
Did you yourself give any evidence or information to SIU investigators?
I did not.
So the information that they gleaned and placed in their report must have come from sources other than yourself.
Correct.
Chair, because the SIU report then may well constitute, particularly on further evidence, corroborating evidence, it's our intention to go through it. That will take some time. But before we go there, perhaps we can just deal with 33.2 and 33.3, and then I'm going to take Mr. Watson, I'm sorry, Chair, it's late, Mr. Agrizzi, through the contents of the report.
Okay.
Did you discuss the content of this report with Mr. Watson?
Yeah, we did.
What was his attitude at the time?
No, his attitude was he blamed everybody else. He blamed Mark Taverner, he blamed Danny Mansell, he blamed Tony Perry for not taking precautionary measures.
And did he give you any assurance?
He told me everything's under control.
Did he give you any advice?
He said I had to stick to him. Told us we had to stick to him, otherwise the future is very bleak.
Right. Subsequent to the release of the report, were any subpoenas issued,
Yes.
amongst others to Mark and Sharon Taverner?
That is correct.
And did you receive any instruction in relation to those subpoenas?
I was to meet them and to take steps to delay their appearance as much as possible.
Do you have anything further to add? And again, please.
I was to attend every single meeting with them and Brian Biebuck and make sure that Brian Biebuck was the attorney on record for them. They weren't allowed to use anybody but whoever Brian Biebuck agreed to if he didn't do it himself. And I had to make sure that Bosasa was not compromised in all of this. And I had to insist that I saw the statements before they were submitted. I did this, and eventually they appeared in compliance to the subpoenas after about, if I'm not mistaken, it was about 18 months.
A period of 18 months, you say, elapsed,
If I'm not mistaken, I might be mistaken.
but a long period from the
Very
issue
long.
of the subpoena to the execution of the subpoena.
Correct.
But eventually you say the subpoenas were complied with.
Correct.
All right. The SIU report appears at page 279 of bundle S1.
I just want to clarify, you asked me a
Yes.
question if they complied with the subpoena, Chair. If they complied with the subpoena.
Yes.
They complied in terms of appearance.
Yes.
But what was put into the subpoena was not necessarily the whole truth. So you're
What
aware.
was put in response to, what they said in response to the
The
subpoena?
questions.
In
Correct.
response to the questions?
Okay.
Yes, okay.
And in terms of your instructions, you ensured that this occurred.
Yes. Well, not me directly, but yes.
Chair, you're aware that the document at page 279 is incomplete. The complete, and by complete I mean basic report as opposed to the report plus all annexures, is later on in annexure S2, or exhibit S2. But because our preparations took place and my notes on this document were put on this document in preparation for the evidence before the fuller one was put in the bundles, would you bear with me, please, if we go through the document at page 279 and then, when necessary, go to the document, the full document for the subsequent pages?
That's
Otherwise,
fine.
I have to transfer all my notes.
No, that's fine.
Thank you, Chair. This report is preceded by an executive summary which appears on page 279. And in paragraph 1 of the executive summary, it appears that the SIU's intervention was authorized by a presidential proclamation,
That's correct.
which was gazetted on 28 November 2007.
That is correct.
Reference is made to the surfacing in 2006 of various allegations in the media relating to the allegedly irregular awarding of contracts by the Department of Correctional Services to Bosasa Operations Pty Limited and its affiliated companies.
That is correct,
That's
Chair.
what the executive summary says. So, as we will discover, this SIU investigation deals only with contracts between the Department of Correctional Services on the one hand and Bosasa or Bosasa-related companies on the other.
Correct.
And it deals only with 4 contracts. What is referred to here as the kitchens contract, what we've referred to in your evidence as the catering contract.
Correct.
Or contracts. The second contract is the access control contract. Is that correct?
Correct.
The third is the televisions or CCTV contract.
That is correct.
And the fourth is the fencing contract.
That is correct.
So it's only those 4 contracts between those 2 parties or sets of parties that are dealt with in this report.
In this report, you're right.
We know, of course, that there are many other contracts tainted with the type of evidence that you've given. Is that correct?
That is correct.
The allegations that were investigated, which came from the Public Service Commission and the Office of the Auditor General, are listed in the middle of paragraph, or in the middle of page 279. One of the more serious allegations referred to, and those are the words in the executive summary, are firstly an irregular relationship existed between Bosasa or members of the Bosasa group of companies and 2 DCS, Department of Correctional Service officials, namely the former Commissioner of Correctional Services, Mr. L.M.T., Commissioner M.T., and the DCS Chief Financial Officer, Mr. P. Gillingham. The second allegation is that Commissioner M.T. and Gillingham may have unduly received benefits as a result of the award of some of the contracts awarded by DCS to Bosasa and its affiliates. The third allegation is 2 tenders, namely the kitchens tender and the access control tender, were irregularly extended. And the fourth is Bosasa and its affiliates were responsible for drafting the bid specifications for these tenders. Now, in respect of all these issues, you have given detailed evidence.
Most definitely.
The same issues were the subject of the investigations by the SIU.
I do think mine is a bit more comprehensive, though.
Yes. Well, in some respects you're correct, and in others not.
Correct.
The SIU report contains other information, and some of the evidence you've given is not contained in the report.
Correct.
But the purpose, Chair, of leading this evidence and taking the witness through is, again, to see what in the report this witness knows from his own knowledge, and also to understand what evidence the SIU investigation produced. We have that evidence in a series of affidavits, and it will be impossible for this commission to call each and every witness, but those affidavits will be placed before you in their proper form and will be summarized and presented to you. But in short, the evidence that this witness has given and will give appears, at least to some extent, to be corroborated by the outcome of the investigations of the SIU, and the detail will follow.
Okay, thank you.
And so the executive summary continues, Mr. Agrizzi, to say shortly after the publication of the proclamation, the SIU commenced with the investigation of the contracts awarded to Bosasa and its affiliates, namely the kitchens, access control, fencing and television contracts.
That is correct.
In the executive summary, the findings in respect of the kitchens tender HK2 of 2004 are set out. Now, you've given evidence of what you refer to as a catering contract or catering contracts. Do you recall that?
Correct.
Is that evidence, in fact, the same, relating to the same tender as is referred to here, the kitchens tender?
It's identical.
Right. And you recognize that number, HK2 2004?
I do.
And is that one of the contracts about which you've testified?
That is one of them.
According to the SIU investigation, it was awarded to Bosasa on 20 July 2004.
That is correct.
Evidence that you have not given, and this may be given later, Chair, is referred to here in the SIU report. The summary, or the executive summary, reads, the evidence gathered by the SIU shows that there were clear deviations from the National Treasury Supply Chain Management, a guide for accounting officers, authorities, Supply Chain Management Guide for Accounting Officers, more particularly in that the end user departments were not included in the bid process. There was also no proper financial planning for this tender, in that there was no feasibility study nor needs analysis conducted. I don't need to ask you to comment on that, but will ask you to comment on the next paragraph, which reads, the evidence clearly shows that Gillingham, outside the course of his normal duties, played an integral role from the outset in the procurement process and was irregularly instrumental in developing the tender specifications. Now, in relation to that, do you know whether Mr. Gillingham played a role on the various bid committees or otherwise in the procurement process relevant to this contract?
Yes, he did.
Okay, so we know that you paid him money. We know why you say you paid him money, according to your evidence, of course, still to be tested. And we know that, according to the SIU investigation, as confirmed by you, the recipient of that money played an integral role in the procurement process.
That is correct.
And as described here, was irregularly instrumental in developing the tender specifications. You've given that evidence.
Yes.
And that appears to be confirmed now by the SIU investigation. Then, interestingly, the following is set out. During the course of a search and seizure operation conducted at Gillingham's residence, a document containing the bid evaluation criteria and guidelines for evaluating the kitchen's tender was found in the form of electronic data. You obviously can't confirm what the SIU found.
I cannot.
But you do know, and you have told the Chair, that there was an exchange of information between yourself and Mr. Gillingham.
And Mr. Mansell, correct.
And Mr. Mansell. And you've also told the Chair that this, well, I'm not sure that you have, but did this exchange of information take place over a computer?
Yes.
Exchange between electronic devices?
Yes.
The report goes on to read Mr. J. Milan. Is that the Mr. Milan you've referred to?
That is the same gentleman, yes.
The SIU cyber forensic expert determined that this document originated from the computer of Mr. A. Agrizzi, Bosasa's Chief Executive Officer, Stroke Manager and Director. Leave aside the description of the post, but you've testified that documents were exchanged in relation to the bids between yourself and others and Mr. Gillingham.
Well, I think Mr. Milan comments are incorrect. Number one is I was never ever the Chief Executive Officer.
All right.
I was an operations coordinator. And according to Ms. Milan, the document was saved on my computer on the 28th of June 2004. I can't say that I actually created that document. It says that the same day that the DCS commenced with the screening of the bids received in respect of the kitchen tender. So I just want to clarify because it says
Let's take it step by step because you've gone ahead.
Sure.
All right. Let's deal with the first sentence relevant to what we're discussing now. It reads, Mr. J. Milan, the
Correct.
SIU cyber forensic expert, determined that the particular document referred to originated from the computer of Mr. Agrizzi. What do you say about that?
If you read it in context, it says it originated. And this is where I'm having an issue. It says it originated from a computer. You're talking about BSAS's Chief Executive Officer. According to Milan, the document was last saved. I'm reading something totally different. Sorry, on what paragraph are you?
All right.
Here he is on the second big paragraph from the end of or bottom of page 280. And he is on line 3.
You see the fifth paragraph.
Yes.
It reads, Mr. J. Milan, the SIU cyber forensic expert,
Yes, just a second.
determined that the particular document that he's referring to originated from your computer. Now, let's just stop there.
Has he found the paragraph?
Have you found that?
No, I'm still looking for it. Sorry.
Okay, all right, okay.
All right.
I'm lost.
Are you
It's
on
been a
page
long
200?
day.
Are you
Okay.
on page
I am on
200?
page 208.
Okay, let me tell him, Mr. Pretorius, it's been a long day.
Found it.
Are you on page 280?
I am, sir.
Okay. You see, if you go to the bottom of the page,
Yes.
there is a paragraph that has 3 lines only. Can you see that?
Yes.
And then there is another paragraph above that.
That
It's a
starts
big
on the
paragraph
evidence of the whistleblower.
that starts with during the course of
Okay, yes, I've got
a
that.
search and seizure.
Correct.
Yes. Go to line 3 then.
Well, perhaps, Chair, if I may interrupt, I apologize. Perhaps we should give the witness an opportunity to read the whole paragraph.
Yes, I just want to get
Well, he
the
must find it first.
Yeah, I found
Have
it
you
now.
found it now?
Chair, I found it.
Okay, all
Now,
right.
let me read it.
Okay, but is it necessary for him to read the whole of it?
Yes, I think so.
I think I need to
Okay,
put into
because
context
I'm
because
confused.
Okay,
there's
thank
one
you.
section that says, Chair, that it was, he could not determine the date of the first creation. And that's where I'm getting confused. So if I could just read it in context.
Okay, no, I think Mr. Pretorius would like you to read the whole paragraph.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
Take your time. We are over time, but perhaps we should finish this tranche.
Yeah, just this part, yeah. You start. Did you want him to read silently or aloud, Mr.
No,
Pretorius?
he can read it silently to acquaint himself
Oh,
with
okay, all right, okay.
every allegation in context. Perhaps I'm being unfair this late in the day by picking and choosing the sentences that I want to refer to.
Well, that's why I'm getting confused because we're hopping and it confuses me.
On the contrary, Mr. Agrizzi, I was going in sequence, but I don't want to argue with you about that. That's futile. Just read the paragraph, please.
Sure. I would like to ask the chair a question to explain to me. It says that determined...
Well, I'm sorry, Mr. Pretorius. If the witness has questions after reading it, I think we better adjourn, let him have time to look at it properly, and then we can continue tomorrow. How is that, Mr. Agrizzi? That will be fine.
I don't mind.
Yeah,
It's actually
it's
just-
not going to make much difference, a few minutes.
We can't answer questions, unfortunately, because it's not our evidence, it's your evidence.
I
But I would
understand.
advise, you have legal representation,
Yes.
read it carefully, discuss it, and we will discuss it tomorrow.
I'm happy with that.
Thank you.
Oh,
Thank
okay.
you.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
So we adjourn at this stage, Mr. Pretorius.
Thank you, Chair.
All right, so that's another day of testimony by Angelo Agrizzi, who was the former COO at Bosasa, and he was giving his testimony again today. Again, more damning allegations being put forward as testimony to the Zondo Commission of Inquiry, and what a day it's been. It started, of course, with the Deputy Chief Justice lambasting the media for leaking stories head on.
We were on page 70.
Oh, yeah, okay. No, that's good enough.
At the end of paragraph 33.3.
Okay. Thank you. We are going to adjourn until tomorrow at 10 o'clock. We adjourn.